to our work session of Tuesday, March. So we're glad to see you all. So let's get right started with the work session. We're moving around our agenda a little bit just because of time constraints. So what do you want to talk about first, the MS4?
We'll start with, we've got Sabrina here and Tom and Amanda. So why don't we start with stormwater?
Do we need a motion? A motion to open the work
Oh,
session?
sorry, motion to open the work session. Thank you. Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So,
Thank you.
last time I had mentioned to the board that there are some heightened MS4 permitting requirements that are being proposed, and that it was our quick glance at the requirements that really caught us off guard because of the personnel that it would require to implement and the money that went along with it. And as we talked about unfunded mandates in the past, this unfunded mandate basically surpasses anything that we've seen before.
I have to say,
A memo from staff with an executive summary, basically outlining what we believe the financial implications are to us in manpower. And there's also actually a breakdown, an Excel sheet that comes with it. It's in the back. Take a look at as we've broken down each one of the tasks. But Sabrina's here. She was instrumental in putting together this chart with Bob Cioli and Bart Carey. It is the Development Department and DPW which will bear the lion's share of the workload of these heightened MS4 requirements. Sabrina, can you walk
Yeah. One of the things I do want to say is the spreadsheet in there is for DPW's costs only. The other costs are enumerated for the other minimum control measures in the memo. Ultimately, there are 6 different minimum control measures that the town implements in relation to its stormwater pollution prevention plan, its MS4 permit. Those 6 minimum control measures through a new draft permit that DEC is looking to promulgate increases the town's activities, the things that we must comply with. One of the largest areas involves minimum control measure 3, illicit discharge elimination, detection, and detection. Where we are now responsible as a municipality, as the MS4, for inspecting all of the septic systems within the east of Hudson watershed. So we have a kind of a double-fold impact. We not only have the DEC regulations, but because we have land area within the New York City drinking water supply, that has what's known as a total maximum daily load analysis for phosphorus. We have heightened permit conditions. The inspection and analysis of individual septic systems is an attachment to the east of Hudson watershed and that phosphorus TMDL. We also have water bodies in our community that are listed on the state's impaired water bodies listing or priority water bodies list, which have also created additional permitting requirements. So that is the issue with the on-site septic systems is that we currently do not permit, regulate, or inspect local septic systems. We have a good sense that we have roughly 5,000 properties, 70% of them have septic systems. And, we did a pretty detailed calculation to come up with the estimates that we came up with. And so the 1.3 million average per year for the next 5 years, I feel very confident is a very conservative number that is based in reality of what it costs to do this work, how many hours are in a day. So that is an area that is increasing this budget tremendously in minimum measure control 3. Another area that is increasing tremendously is in minimum control measure 6. Because we are in the New York City watershed, we will be required to clean out catch basins twice a year. I think it's twice a year, but it's more frequent than we do now. In addition to the cleaning, we have the disposal of whatever we collect to dispose of that sediment. And we also are required to street sweep more frequently all of our roads within the municipalities. And again, this equates to the need for another truck, another driver, another safety companion type of thing. So the numbers are really reflective of what we need in order to do this effectively. Another thing I wanted to mention to you is that for the first time, we are being required to map and maintain inspect, and report on our entire stormwater system. So in previous permits, it has very much been focused on the outfall, what comes out at the end of the pipe. Okay. Now they are asking us to take stock of the pipes, the swales, the stormwater practices, and really get a handle on every single component of our system. And much of our system is natural. You know, it is a stormwater swale that's along the side of a road, directing water to a pipe that then goes into a stream. So then we would be responsible for mapping that swale, taking down its condition, what it structurally consists of, and detailing that, and really recreating our reporting system on our stormwater system. So it's much broader, this permit, in regards to managing our stormwater system. We also will need to do more inspections. Right? When for the first time in minimum control measure 4, we are now being tasked with investigating private stormwater controls. So if a subdivision goes in, it's approved by the planning board. Many times there'll be a stormwater basin or other stormwater control device. In the past, we've only had to worry about those practices on town properties. We have a sand filter. We may have a detention basin, but now we are being asked to make sure that a practice, which is normally provided to a homeowners association or a third party entity to maintain, we now need to make sure that it is being maintained, and we are required to inspect it as that third party. We are also required to have more state approved training in order to do this work. So every employee who works under this program must be trained by an entity that is approved by New York State DEC. So that's just a kind of a quick summary of where like the biggest impacts, budgetary impacts of this program are. Across the board, there's definitely more detail required through this permit cycle than ever before.
And this doesn't even include additional costs to homeowners, such as the requirement that now septic is pumped every year instead of every 3 years, and reimbursement will not be available even for those in the sewer system.
I can't speak to that. I don't know if reimbursement is available. Those are different programs that are separate and apart from the stormwater management, the MS4 program, the stormwater program. But yeah, if we are inspecting septic systems, if they are failing, they then fall into what is considered an illicit discharge in minimum control measure 3, where we have enforcement requirements.
For clarity purposes, it's about $3.5 million over the 5 years, not that much per year, because I think you had said.
No,
It's
actually,
an average of 1.3.
It's almost 7 million over
So the numbers
5 years.
$600 some odd thousand per year. What am I
No.
looking at on top of that?
that's DPW. If you go to
That's
the very end of
DPW.
that chart.
Yes.
If you look on the second page of the cover memo, you have the yearly expenditure.
So it's like 1.2 million the first year approximately.
And then we used a 5% inflation.
That's astronomical.
So over the 5 years, they're looking at 6.6.
Close to $7 million.
And
Yes.
and they believe that's a conservative estimate. So it's staggering. We still have a 2% tax cap. And you know, we've kept to it. Of course, you know, obviously at any year, you know, the board has the option to take and, you know, override the cap, but.
We don't
you know,
want to
on
do
one-
that.
On one hand, they're asking for fiscal responsibility, and on the other hand, they're imposing just a fabulous unfunded mandate for a municipality that has always excelled. You know, we've been audited on multiple occasions. We've always come through with flying colors. There's no distinction here being made between municipalities that have, you know, barely put in any effort at all, and those of us who took our responsibilities under the current MS4 permitting very seriously and always did everything, you know, and then some. So it just,
So we need to turn this into a comment letter,
yes.
right, that we're going to send to the state. And also, I think we need to lobby our legislators and tell them this is not okay to put this requirement on taxpayers, especially, like you said, Jill, in a municipality where we've done a very good job and we're very diligent, to me is just reckless.
So for next meeting, we will have a comment letter for you, for your approval and then for circulation. And I know that you are actively involved with the supervisors group, so perhaps after the town board approves the letter, it may be something that you can pass on to your supervisors group.
I will.
Again, you know,
What is the timing, the projected timing at this point, or proposed timing, I should say?
So final comments are due by March 22nd. To New York State DEC. This is the second round of commenting, I'm led to believe. This permit was initially promulgated in 2017, and we had submitted a letter, you know, as part of several different organizations, the Northern Westchester Watershed Committee, the East of Hudson Watershed Committee, you know, where we kind of went through the permit and we identified kind of the main areas of the changes and what it would cost. The environmental community apparently has been many of the changes in this permit were driven by the environmental community. Initially, they wanted monitoring pre and post practice, you know, where we would have to get involved with a lab and really understanding whether or not the BMP was working and removing the pollutants as expected. Those changes have been removed from this permit, but many of the same things are still in the permit that we had commented on previously. And I have forwarded some of that language to council in preparation of a letter for you guys.
yeah,
March 22nd is the deadline, and our understanding, other supervisors who are part of the East of Hudson Watershed Corporation said they have spoken with DEC representatives, and they feel that this is it.
we'll have the letter to the board this week. We don't have the time to wait until next Tuesday.
I would just say it should be a pretty forceful letter, in my opinion,
Okay.
as to what these issues are and how they're going to significantly impact both the town and our residents and taxpayers.
Should we make appointments with our state representatives? You know, at their local offices, perhaps?
I mean, I don't know that we need to do
They're-
that.
they're
We're just
happy.
gonna, I
Or
think we can
call.
speak to them.
Speak to them, right.
Yes, and let them know this is happening and we have issues. And we're doing that as larger groups as well, of supervisors and, you know, municipal officials, but I think we need to do that as well.
Sometimes when you make an appointment as a group, it has a large impact as well as writing, but there's not much time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sabrina.
Sure.
Ed, did you speak to Jen at all, or? Okay, all right, then why don't we move to, do you want to move to, I'm sorry, Superintendent here? Oh, okay, great. So we're going to jump around again. We have our presentation for proposed development at the former Millwood Supply property. Those property owners are here to present to the board. Come on up, introduce yourselves.
Were you able to load the?
We were. Technology is such a thing.
Oh, that's How are you? I'm Larry Rhoda. Thank you for your time to let us present this to you. We're looking forward to it and hope you enjoy the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paulette Beldotti. Just wanted to let you know my family has been in Millwood since 1932. My grandfather started Millwood Lumber in the 1950s. It became one of the top producing lumber yards in the whole Northeast. And we're very proud to develop this site. We've been waiting to do this for years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's John Fry with Nexus Creative Architecture Planning and Design. It's nice to be here live. It's unusual. It's a new experience being live again. So this is a lot to process. This is an overarching presentation. This particular package has many, many, many images as part of a study, a conceptual study. I am going to clip through them fairly quickly. In deference to time and in deference to our colleague Dan Ciarcia, who is the engineer, and much of what Dan has to share really leverages the color images that we're going to share in the concept. So you're all familiar with the site. Millwood Lumber, as everyone has known it for many, many years, exited in December 2020. Over the course of 2021, and really over the course of a long period of time. Ideas for this site beyond Millwood Lumber, it's sort of its next life potentially, have been explored. Clearly over the last, in 2021, it's been more intense. It's fair to say, I think, and true, there have been a number of suitors who have approached Paulette and Larry. We've actually been in here to visit about other concepts. So the full circle comes to this concept, which we believe, when we look back over the 20 years or 25 years of Millwood Hamlet discussions, design guidelines, studies, what's envisioned for Millwood Hamlet, this reflects conceptually much of those studies that have accrued over the years. So if we'll clip along in the slides fairly quickly, as Paulette and Larry shared, this is a legacy site for the family. We've explored numerous design guidelines to come to a sensitive, at least conceptual presentation to share with you tonight. We'll continue to move along. Much of what we're proposing, although not developed, conceptually represents and reflects the images that you see here. Walkability, visual linkages, sensitive to scale, heritage. Obviously, it's adjacent to the bike trail. That's a tremendous opportunity. We'll continue. Next slide, please. Spatial quality, housing diversity, all of those elements in conjunction with a science-based notion of how do you process sanitary requirements on this site. So this site has been limited by its zoning, its IG industrial zoning, and clearly by its lack of municipal sanitary facilities. We'll continue, please. So we've looked at a range of density scenarios, mixed use components. We know that, at least as a conceptual metric, we started at 50 units as a target because the raw initial economics for creating an on-site sanitary sewer facility hovered around 50 units. That's not a hard and fast number. That's just where we started. And we explored, well, what would somewhere between 40 and 50 units look like in terms of building typology? May I step over to the screen, away from the
I
microphone?
think you can take the microphone with you if you'd like.
See, I've forgotten about this live stuff. So, and again, I will pick up the pace in the images quickly, but the overview is Millwood Road, Schumann Station Road, bike trail. And conceptually, we've recognized the fact that sensitivity to scale along Station, we'd like to reflect the work that has evolved in the housing units across the street. So clockwise, we have carriage house townhomes, we have apartment units above retail, small retail, and we have a denser building that is above a large parking footprint on Schumann. So the clockwise density runs this way. We know we want to leverage the bike trail as an amazing amenity, both a public amenity and a private amenity. And we know that we're going to have, for any scenario on this site, a significant footprint for a on-site sanitary facility. So how do you conceptually put all that in the hopper? And these are the ideas that begin to evolve. The sanitary facility is actually tucked back in the corner. It has a large roof terrace that's a public space also. That initiative is so that we create a long, significant public space, orchard, footprint, great lawn, adjacent to the bike trail. As you know today, the bike trail is essentially cut off on its easterly edge with industrial sheds. Those would all be removed. And so that experience, as you begin to traverse between the two parcels, really opens up. And it's a terrific, what we would think conceptually, a terrific experience along the bike trail. It would become a node in planning terms. So, you know, again, you can begin to see the scale along Station Road, sort of the carriage house scale, a mixed-use scale, fairly narrow profiles from the north. And as Schumann Road begins to rise, because it has a significant topography change north to south, a denser building that sits over a parking footprint. So next image, please.
How many acres is this site, approximately?
I forget how many acres this is, Dan. I'm going to look to you to.
1.79 acres.
Paulette would know.
A half acre.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Paulette. Next slide, please. So in a larger snapshot of site plan specific, this is the majority of the parking, which is concealed below the denser, larger building footprint. There are other pockets of parking distributed around the site, but they're all hidden for the most part from public view. We thought that was an important planning initiative. We've created this large green space in here. We've tucked a sanitary processing facility in here as best as possible, as low as possible, that from all practical visual sense becomes integrated into what the experience is in the public space. We'll continue. We've looked at numerous studies, configurations, quite frankly, even at a conceptual level, of keeping the existing buildings or phasing through, then replacing the two forward buildings. So these are just iterations of explorations in that extent. And obviously we've begun to connect the dots on some basic science. We'll continue. These are some of the other notions where we actually explored how do we get some more parking but still conceal it. Continue, please. Then you can see as you go up to the second level, you begin to realize all of the residential components in their various typologies, the carriage houses, the apartment units above retail, and apartment units, condominium units, co-ops. We're not sure of that specific typology in this footprint. We'll continue. I think we'll really start to pick up. These are just how the floors begin to drop away as you rise up level by level. We'll continue again because I think we'll continue again. So now again, these are very diagrammatic, right? These are model block studies. But Station Road, Millwood, Schumann, existing buildings back here. Obviously, this is the nursery. And you begin to see how We're trying to visually open this up, even in this corner building footprint, but the three basic typologies are here. In this particular study, these are the existing buildings, which could be left or phased. These portions could be phased, these could be left. Continue, please. Continue. Or a new structure replacing the existing building, which fits into the master plan concepts. Then you begin to see the open terrace above, some feature pavilions, and the sanitary facility tucked in below. We'll continue. Different views. These are meant to be, this area is meant to be a second floor roof terrace above the parking for the corner structure. You can see the entrance to the partially below grade parking level below this structure, and the circulation underneath a streetscape element along Millwood. Continue. Again, existing structure scale, we want to try to be mindful and consistent with those. These units, as carriage houses, have garages below, and the unit really starts at the second level, but the garages don't face the streetscape, right? There's this internal courtyard concept. And, again, emphasizing the notion of transparency into the public, through the bike, North County Trail, into the common space. We'll continue. These are very diagrammatic, again, showing configurations of scale. Continue, please. So, Dan, I think we'll turn it over to you before we get to questions and discussions, because none of this works without Dan. You'll be the star. You want to hold, or?
Although I'm shorter than you. Good evening, Dan Ciarcia from CRC Engineering. We started to work with Paulette and Larry. We looked at the site, we looked at the zoning, and we looked at what the town's vision for Millwood was. As you know, it had been a lumber yard, and nobody's beaten a path to their door to put a lumber yard in there. So they're at a crossroads to try and figure out what to do with the property. So John looked at this. We're seeing a lot of nice concepts, but ultimately what it comes down to is sewage disposal. And the issue is, do you try and just do something in the, I guess it's the IG zone, that doesn't generate as much sewage, or do you try and realize some of these mixed-use visions that the town has been trying to promote with the Millwood hamlet? One of the interesting things that ends up happening there is we're really right at the borderline between being in the watershed and out of the watershed. The other side of the street is the New York City watershed, and there's a lot of constraints that go along with it, not the least of which is surface discharges from sewage treatment plants are not permitted. So when I looked at the density that John was proposing and the constraints of the site, it seemed like the only logical way to do that was to do with a packaged wastewater treatment plant. As we looked at it, we thought that there was some opportunity there for, if we were to establish a transportation company, which would then in turn allow us to perhaps look at some of the other parcels in the hamlet, as well as some of the parcels that maybe aren't fully utilized because they're in the watershed and they're constrained by sewage disposal. So after we looked at this, we became aware that the town had done a study which went on. I mean, there was the old studies for the Riverwoods Yeshiva and Random Farms, and my understanding is the Random Farms thing has kind of gone in a different direction. But when we looked at the Millwood hamlet and the connection to the existing county interceptor, the numbers are, sort of off the charts to accomplish that. So the viability of doing that is constrained by just the financial situation. Now, the one thing that's recently came up, and I was kind of shocked at the level of funding, but the water quality improvement project thing that's administered through the DEC, it used to be they would fund things at a 25% level. I'm seeing projects now that they're funding at an 80% level. So if the town partnering with us made an application, there's sort of two tracks. I mean, we can, if the board likes this concept and is willing to explore the zoning required to implement it, we could look at doing this with the on-site wastewater treatment plant and the transportation concept, but none of that's going to happen overnight. So if we explore this other option, which could then, we could look at Pheasant Run, we could look at all the other businesses in there. If we get funded at a level close to that, then all of a sudden creating a special district to realize the whole Millwood thing would come together. And I think that, it would just be one of those things that I think there's opportunities now just because of the level of infrastructure financing that we'll probably be seeing over the next year or two as they roll out the Build Back Better stuff. But this wasn't a Build Back Better thing. This just happened last year, this last round of grants that was put out, and Yorktown got a grant at 80% funded. So it's happening, and we'd like to partner with you, or to see if we could realize that. So I just wanted to lay out those options, but it basically comes back to, if you want to implement the mixed-use concept in Millwood, it's all about the sewers. If we can't make that happen, then industrial uses and other things that don't generate a lot of wastewater is what's going to be attracted to the hamlet. So I think we're at the crossroads, and that's our thoughts on how to advance not only our project but the Millwood hamlet.
Thank you.
So I guess we're ready for questions now, after all that.
Okay, you have questions, you want to go first?
One question is, what is the transportation concept that you described?
It's a tool that's in New York State law that allows sewage collection systems, treatment plants to be owned by private corporations. So you become a utility. So you're regulated by the Public Service Commission. You charge a fee based upon what it costs you to operate the thing. So that would be the concept, because we could go on our own, but if we establish a transportation company, then that becomes the means to bring other people in and have them pay their fair share of benefiting from that facility.
And the fee is charged to residents who would live on that site, who are utilizing?
Right, initially it would be, I mean, if we didn't do a transportation company, it would just be part of their HOA expense.
Mm-hmm.
The transportation company would give us the ability to go beyond the footprint, go beyond this project.
Got it.
But, even if we go down that path, we could be looking at this on parallel tracks to see if we can do the plan which I think benefits everybody, which is to come up with a way to finance, come up with a special district that's affordable to all.
And the Yorktown example that you cited, what project is that?
They had 4 pump stations, and they were upgrades of existing facilities, and it was around, I think it was about 7.2 million. So it was financed at so the grant was at an 80% level. Right. So that really changes the calculus on these things, because your consultant's report, I think, had it at like 14 million, because I guess the random farm, once the random farms came out, then it was like a 14 million project, which isn't going to happen. But 14 million with a generous grant, all of a sudden, and it's got some of the right elements for these grants, because you have Pheasant Run, which is on a septic system that's rather old, so that gives you some piece of eligibility. The other thing is the community redevelopment thing is another component of the grant. So the you know, the angle of trying to reinvent Millwood would fall into that. So, you know, it seems to be, it makes some sense to try and put together a grant application and hit on all these elements and see if you can get funding, because that's I think, the key to doing the big picture thing. But our thing, and even down the road, I mean, if we did a wastewater treatment plant and this thing happened 10 years from now, now you've have some more assessed value to bring into a special district, and, you know, it just provides more critical mass to getting the project done.
Okay, so putting that aside for a minute, because I think that's probably a lot more questions to that than we have the capacity to ask right now. But in terms of the plan itself, it was going to be what, 50 units, you said?
Well, that is a conceptual target. The challenge is, that's a conceptual target. We realize that the granular elements of parking it in a real world way, having, you know, understanding what the market is for that particular corner site and what the unit size, you know, an appropriate unit mix and typology is, all of those would be put in the hopper and some number would come out. But
And that would be, you're anticipating it's rental, correct?
we've talked about rental, but I think there are alternatives open. And the unique element to that concept of different typologies probably lends to different ownership or rental or some other scenarios.
Okay.
Not
And
to be elusive.
were you contemplating an affordability requirement?
Well, certainly we've talked about that. We're aware of the initiative and the desires and the dynamics. But, you know, at a conceptual level, we certainly talked about it, and we understand that that's probably a component to this.
And what, I couldn't tell, was it 3 stories or 4?
The larger building is 4 stories above the parking level. The parking
It's
level.
that one in the back.
Yeah, the one up Schuman, but, you know, as I noted, as you're aware, Schuman rises up the hill right there. So the intent is to nestle the parking level as low and out of the way as possible, and really 3.5, what we would call 3.5 stories, because that upper story is more of a tucked under the roof line concept to be more sensitive, so.
Yep. And then the townhouses and the others bordering on Station Place, and those were 3 stories?
Yes,
Okay.
and with, you know, first floor, very limited retail on the corner segments.
Okay.
And are you anticipating a mix of units in size-wise, like studios, 1-bedrooms? 2-bed?
Absolutely.
What would be the maximum number of bedrooms, do you think, per unit?
Well,
For the
I mean,
largest.
again, at a conceptual level, we've discussed everything from large 1-bedroom pluses, depending on the market, to 2-bedroom pluses, and I think we've not talked about 3 bedrooms, because that seems to be a number that makes everybody anxious, and perhaps not a realistic, marketable residential unit at that location.
And have you had any thoughts for what would be on the first floor? Are you anticipating, you know, some retail?
Yes, absolutely.
And/or amenities for?
Well, so the project will have, in the larger structure, over the anticipated footprint of the sanitary facility, that's amenity space, right, just as the grade level is. And adjacent to that would be indoor development amenity space, probably a fitness area and meeting spaces and other accommodations, but certainly amenity space.
And have you all had discussions with developers okay.
My couple questions is, if people come, which would be terrific to help to revitalize that area, have you thought about how, I think Gedney would be used, especially if there's young families there, they're not necessarily going to drive, or, I mean, certainly they can, but have you thought about how you could facilitate, if you will, and keep people safe if they wanted to go on foot? In other words, there's no sidewalk now, But if you put that many people there and you connect it somehow, it would be a great mechanism or means.
It
to
really would. I mean,
So if you
we
get any
have-
thought to that and how we could potentially partner with you to make that happen?
Well, we recognize the linkage, the desire to emphasize pedestrian linkages, whether it's east, west, north. So as an easterly link, we would concur that would be an important and an amazing linkage.
Right, and then in reference to heights, the parking is not below ground, the parking is at grade?
Yeah, it's really at grade. I mean, if it's at the lowest grade at the street elevation or slightly lower, and Schumann rises up, it eventually rises up a story by the time it gets to the southerly corner of the site.
And I noticed one of the slides showed, I thought, 49 spaces.
In the large footprint?
Yeah.
Yes.
So just thinking about that, if you've got a mix of 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, you've got families, you've got people with multiple cars, you know, what's sort of the thought there? And then I guess related almost to what Jeremy said, but maybe beyond that, would there be any kind of development transportation offered? So our train station's obviously in the Chappaqua Hamlet. People who live there only have 1 car. Would there be anything, you know, offered there to residents?
I mean,
Shuttle,
so we recognized parking from the day one. Parking was going to be a challenge because we wanted to maintain some green and open space. So there are satellite pocket parking areas beyond the large footprint concealed parking, but we're still not going to get there depending on whatever the zoning is applied and whatever metric is applied. We've definitely discussed what the opportunities for alternatives are. And the Ronas have some other parcels. And you know, I think it's in full transparency. We've talked about what those realities may or may not be. But in terms of a common transporting system, this is the perfect project for that. I would suspect that any development scenario, as a matter of good marketing and good functionality, would likely embrace that, or if not.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not transit-oriented development in that it's not adjacent to the train station, but if you offer that, it can almost become a version of that, since the train station is such a huge draw for.
Any other questions?
We understand it's a large process.
Thank you.
Really interesting, thank you.
Thank you very
Yes,
much.
thank you.
Thank you.
So, what are our next steps?
Well, it's very early days, right? These are very broad conceptual ideas, but if the board was receptive to them, the next step would be, I think, further meetings with the applicant's team and town staff to flesh out some of these details.
I mean, can only speak for myself, but I'm certainly open to, you know, continuing the exploration of this project.
Yes, I am too.
I am as well.
I have some concerns over what we saw, but I do think there's an opportunity to do some, you know, responsible development there. I think, you know, more conversations are definitely in order, so.
Definitely. You know, I think as it goes forward, certainly one of the things we want to look at is impact on schools and, you know, traffic, everything else, but obviously that's with any kind of development plan. All right, so I
you very
think
much.
that's good.
Thanks
Well, I
for
think we're
spending some
excited to
time.
continue the conversation with you.
Thank you.
Great. Look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks in advance for all the, you know, I know you put in a lot of thought to things you knew we were going to be interested in, like putting parking behind, you know, heights, things like that. So I appreciate that.
Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.
And should we go to the stretch code next? Sabrina, how was your time? You okay?
I'm okay for a little bit more.
She tries to be in two meetings at once, the wonders of Zoom. Okay, do we want to talk about the stretch code then?
Sure, I can lead that, Sabrina, unless you wanna
No, feel free to start, Ed. I'll add when I need to.
jump in. So, board last year, the town board adopted the stretch code. This is back in December. And when it did so, it followed a model code that NYSERDA had pushed out to municipalities, and we were one of the early adopters. The Code Council, which is a state agency, has advised the town and other municipalities that the model that was used last year is, in their eyes, imperfect, and it creates some ambiguities or uncertainties that they would like to be clarified. That would require another local law. The board would have to, and there is a proposed local law in the packet tonight as a way to try to bring some clarity, at least to what the Code Council is saying. But there is a decision that the board needs to make, I think, as a threshold matter as to whether, because this was not, there was concern expressed last year as to whether this was the right time to bring these requirements, make these requirements, as opposed to just things that people could elect to do. So I think there's a threshold discussion as to whether or not the board wants to go in and make these changes so that the stretch code could be enforced by the building inspector, or whether it wants to take perhaps a different path.
So when we first discussed this last year, my hesitation, and I recognize that, you know, anything we can do to help the environment, to, you know, ease the burdens on residents and energy efficiency is all good. But my concern at the time was that we were also imposing additional costs on residents at a time when, you know, many people have been impacted by COVID, et cetera. And also, given kind of supply chain issues right now with building materials, et cetera, I think mandating certain requirements, like a triple pane window, for instance, if that can't be obtained because of supply chain issues, to now not allow someone to finish, complete a project, to me, was a little troublesome. And I think that, especially with with interest rates rising now, and certainly with the rising costs of energy, you know, any resident who feels that they are able to go to this higher level of materials so that their homes can be more energy efficient, I think always has that option and should take that option. But to mandate it now, since we have to go back and look at this again, I'm sort of thinking maybe that's something we don't want to do right now, in terms of mandating that, and maybe it makes more sense to sort of repeal it for now and see where we come out with this. I know it's probably not politically correct to do that, but I'm also looking at the residents and costs of complying with this, and I'm a little concerned right now. So that's my thought. Also, I do recognize that it's part of our silver certification, and we get points for this. You know, I would urge us, if we did decide to repeal this, to find other ways we can get points and make those up, and, you know, perhaps revisit this in the next year if things look a little better.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't on the board last year when this was considered. I do remember the discussions, and I do remember the thought that, you know, this is going to be imposed statewide at the time, I remember someone saying in a year, so why not get ahead of it? You know, it's the right thing to do long term, you know, and eventually we have to do it anyway. I don't recall, honestly, hearing that much discussion about, you know, a cost benefit for residents, and certainly since that time, inflation is now significantly higher than it was. I think the likelihood of interest rates rising, as you point out, is now, well, who knows actually what could happen. I mean, you know, that may be put on hold if the economy, you know, slows down considerably, but I think that's probably going to happen as well. And then certainly additional supply chain issues, cost inflation, all of that to me, at minimum, given that I wasn't on the board last year and didn't hear those discussions, at minimum for me would want to understand that cost benefit, especially, I'm guessing, and I don't know the numbers, but for residents that are doing improvements or expanding, my guess is that those are, in fact, real hardships. Those costs could be real hardships. So I'm with you in terms of potentially pausing at this point, and at least for my own purposes, understanding what those costs are.
So we did look at the cost benefits. That question was asked. I don't recall, I remember getting an answer. I don't, yeah, Jennifer, you can maybe say, I don't recall it was great.
So NYSERDA had estimated it would be a 10-year break-even point. So 1 to 2% of upfront capital. So yes, there is additional cost. It's not overly significant.
My position is that Newcastle we've always been leaders across the board, and even dating back to Rob Greenstein when we did the Paris Agreement. That sounds silly, but when we signed on, for lack of a better term, demonstrating our recognition of environmental issues, we were awarded, as we discussed before, $100,000. I don't recall if it was the Climate Smart Communities. I forget what program it was. I don't think it's necessarily about being politically correct. I think it's about being environmentally correct. Sometimes it's not an easy lift to do, but it doesn't strike me that this is a heavy lift. We're not talking about any development of your home or refurbishing of your home would require all of this. It's, my recollection, it's certain sizes. It is coming, which is correct, but I think we should lead by example. And one of the biggest probably issues that we face as a nation, as a world, is, among other issues, obviously, but global warming, environmental concerns, greenhouse gases, whatever it may be. But any small step, just as we saw with the Habitat for Humanity. It's not Habitat for Humanity anymore, but you know what I'm talking about on King Street.
Fuller Center.
Thank you. What they've done to that house is incredible. So this may be not to that level, but I believe that the cost, even if it's risen lately because of inflation, is critically important to the future, and we lead by example, and other communities follow us. And I think we should amend as appropriate and maintain the statute, the legislation or the zoning.
Sabrina,
jump?
Jennifer, just to that point, I think it did include any changes you made to your house. It's just that if you were adding on a room, you didn't have to update the rest of your house, but it had to do with whatever new construction you were doing on your home. Is that correct? Do you remember?
Yeah, I'm gonna
I don't think it was a
let
size.
Tom and Sabrina talk about the specifics.
Oh, Tom, you may know.
But could I just make one point before we go there?
Sure.
If we don't adopt it this month, we cannot apply for silver certification this next cycle. We won't have enough points. So just keep that in
Can you tell
mind.
me what the cycles are? When you say we can't do it this cycle, does that mean this calendar year, or does that mean we can't ever?
If I may, there's, in looking at the list of actions, this is a high priority action. We are required to do a certain number of high priority actions. There are not enough actions listed unless NYSERDA amends the action list to enable us to reach silver status if we do not adopt this.
Ever or within a certain amount of time?
No, we probably could not apply for silver this year.
And I'm sorry, what does that do for the town? What does that mean, I guess, in practical effect?
It's a designation that says that Newcastle is a climate smart community, and it's a status. Plus Plus, this gives us a $5,000 grant, and it opens up possibilities for other grants.
I think
And
that, I'm
silver
sorry.
so silver status, I have to assume then that there is then a gold status, right? If there's a silver, am I correct?
They haven't come out with gold yet.
Okay.
Silver wins
I
again.
guess I'm trying to understand where this leads us, and I fully, support environmental and, innovations and green energy. But it's a question of, aside from the sort of signaling with the designation, I'm trying to get a greater understanding of the practical impacts. I am concerned with the supply chain issues for our residents. And, it is too bad because I was going to suggest some sort of compromise where we wait a few months and see, but now you're saying that if we don't do it immediately, that we lose the status somehow, or lose the opportunity to gain this status. Is that right?
Right.
Or we lose the opportunity this year, but we can still make it next year?
If you adopt it next year, we will apply next year.
So we could still earn the
But-
status. I guess I'm just trying to acknowledge that we're still in a post-COVID world. The international situation is dire. Inflation, can be a runaway situation. Again, the supply chain issue is there. So I'm trying to be mindful of the realities while keeping our options open for continuing with this designated status and continuing with Newcastle being at the forefront. I'm trying to address both sides and seeing if there's a way to do, to acknowledge the realities and yet stay on this course of having Newcastle gain silver status at some point, just not immediately, just not this month.
Well, to be
Is that-
clear, I guess one of your questions was, what's the cycle? Is it only,
Right.
it has to be done
Well,
immediately in order to-
our plan was to apply in April. So if it's not adopted now, we certainly couldn't apply in April, and probably would not have enough actions to apply in July, which is the next cycle, and that pushes us out to the following year. But I think it also, there's a bigger question here of, is Newcastle a leader in sustainability? And by not adopting this, we're kind of taking a step back and we're not a leader anymore.
Well, but I mean,
So-
again, to be fair, there are costs and benefits to all of these issues, and being a leader doesn't mean that we, don't acknowledge those costs. And I fully concur with Jeremy that, these are global issues, and we all have to do our part. We're talking about a 2-year, potentially. Last year it was only a year. Now it looks like it might be 2-year gap before our town, presumably for the next, who knows, 100 years, will be bound by this new standard. So to me, in an environment with certainly close to runaway inflation and supply chain issues and rising interest rates, that's a very significant concern that to me is not just brushed aside because we want to be a leader in sustainability. And so I don't know what the economics are right now. Maybe last year it was a 10-year break even, but right now I don't know what they are. And I wasn't on the board last year, so that's how I think about it.
And just really quickly, just Jennifer, I don't want there to be an implication that if we didn't adopt this, that we don't consider ourselves leaders in this space. I think we've done a lot, more than probably most municipalities, and I think we intend to continue to do so. I'm just kind of cognizant of other issues as well, and I want to just make sure we're making a decision that works for our residents.
And I guess I'm sorry to be so persistent on this. I'm trying to get clarity on the cycle. So you said that if we missed the April cycle, we would have the opportunity in July and then the following year. So is is it a quarterly? Can you explain the cycles to me a little bit more clearly?
That's just about the Climate Smart Communities cycle for applying for silver certification. You apply in, I think it's January, April, and July. So if you don't adopt it, we won't be applying this year. And I also think that it's important to note that that NYSERDA, who runs the Climate Smart Communities program, they're constantly changing and removing and adding actions, because this is an action that is ostensibly going to be promulgated by the state under a new energy code in I want to say it's 2024. Tom, I'm not sure if you have that date. This may become an ineligible activity the closer we get to the state promulgating the new energy code for everyone. And we just don't have that crystal ball as to what the state is going to set forth for in next year. We know that this year there's the April date and then the June or July deadline for submission.
So I think it's about having a balanced perspective, and certainly there's been a lot of external shifts since this was last contemplated. I just personally feel like I don't know enough about the initiative, and my hope would be that we could explore that in the near term, and then hopefully be prepared to submit in July if we weren't to pass the resolution.
Yeah, and one thing I would like to understand better is what the hardships would be for the residents, and what the supply chain issues would be with the new, the required improvements.
My brief response to the concerns about inflation and supply chains, I think unfortunately those who don't have the means to make the changes are probably not going to make them anyway regardless right now, because inflation's inflation. Yes, it certainly is going to make the more expensive things that much more, but difficulty securing. But market forces will always control what people do. But I'll fall back again in terms of leaders lead. I think the overall impact will be nominal. And I'm just curious, I don't know if I'm misunderstanding, when you are silver, does that give you access to additional grants you would not otherwise be able to secure? So for example, something for the chap line, because it's a walkable trail. Are there things that we would be missing out should we want to apply for particular grants because we don't have that right status?
I think I can't answer to other grants, but in all of the grant applications become more complex, and the more buttons or boxes you can check, being a silver status climate smart community, we will obtain more points than if we were bronze status. So it really depends on the grant program that we write for, but it's really about being a leader in trying to reduce our carbon footprint, our greenhouse gas emissions community wide.
The term leadership is a little more complex than I think the implications are here. I think leadership requires asking hard questions and taking balanced approaches and not just running after a label. So I think we need to give that a rest a little bit and talk about the real issues. As far as I'm concerned, I am, very much in favor of green energy and seeking those improvements. I'm not sure whether passing this stretch code now as opposed to a few months from now will really make a difference. I think we don't have the requisite information to make those decisions. And so I'm wondering if, these discussions are much ado about nothing. And I mean, quite frankly, at this point, I'm ready to say, let's do it, because I'm not quite sure how much of a difference it's going to make. On the other hand, if there's a strong feeling that we should wait and get more information, then I can see doing that as well, and maybe pursuing this in January.
NYSERDA did give you an estimate, as I said, of 1 to 2% of upfront capital for a resident.
I'm sorry, Jennifer,
So,
1 to 2%.
of
Upfront.
upfront capital, additional upfront capital for the resident.
And just to
So
be
a 10
clear,
year, with a 10-year payback. And what it's doing is lowering their energy usage.
Jennifer, but let's not forget, a majority of the board right now was not on the board when this was passed. So I think that the board may not have enough information right now to even consider this. Because while Jeremy and I looked at this and got that information, a majority of the board sitting here today did not, because they weren't in office yet. So maybe we can, and certainly we weren't voting on it tonight anyway, it's just a work session. So why don't we try to get some more information to the board about this stretch code and costs, and if NYSERDA has any updated projections, all the requirements of the stretch code. I think we're going to need that information to make this decision.
And then we could possibly actually make the July date if.
right,
Yeah, I mean,
right. I mean, I'm not opposed because I'm asking questions.
To be clear, I'm not in any way suggesting that we wouldn't make the change. I'm suggesting I wouldn't want to rush to make the change just to meet an April deadline for certification that, while a great signal, to me is not as important as eventually doing the right thing. And if we eventually do the right thing, if it takes an extra few months for this board, at least for myself, to fully understand it, because I view this as adopting new legislation in my mind. I'm essentially approving something that I didn't approve before. So
Ed, if
that's the way I think about it.
Toll Brothers is broken ground, they're starting their building at Chapel Crossing. So if there's nothing on the books in terms of we go back, we remove this, repeal this, and we don't institute that new stretch code going forward, or modified version, whatever you want to refer to it as, new legislation, then as they build, they would not have to be compliant with that code. Or once we have the code passed, let's make it, whether it's in, well, 3 months would be easier, but if it's not until next year, before they're completed, do they have to then retroactively follow the code?
It'll depend. This is a good Tom question, and he should respond. But I think the answer is it'll depend on when they actually file for the building permit.
So if they've done their building, Tom, and they are ready for, oh, sorry, I apologize, when they file the building permit, and when does that happen?
Good evening, members of the board. We have been instructed to enforce the stretch code since January 1st, 2022, and all the current applications coming in have been stretch compliant. So Toll Brothers had 4 applications in 2021, but anything coming currently would have to be stretch code compliant. When we first started down this journey,
what if the stretch code, Tom, is no longer on the books? If we, and this may be a legal question, if it's no longer there, do they still have to be compliant for those 4 permits that they've presented?
Well, Tom and I talked about this, and I'd like an opportunity to speak to him again if the assumption now is this is going to be more of a pause for some period of months, 2 or 3 months, and what that means administratively. But right now, given what we heard from the Code Council last week, what's on the books at the moment is not enforceable.
But I'm talking more from the repeal, well, so it's not enforceable and we're repealing it, potentially.
Well, a repeal would, I think, help insofar as bringing some clarity because right now you have a law on the books and you have a state agency advising us that changes are needed in order for it to be enforceable. It's not clear to somebody who's coming in for a building permit application, or not sufficiently clear if the law's there, but you have a state agency saying that it's broken. You have uncertainty. So if we're coming back to this in a month or two, again, I'd like a chance to speak to Tom about this. It may be better to take the action of the repeal, just so we have that clarity in case 2 months becomes more than 2 months.
I guess what's concerning me now, having heard this, is that would be in a little bit of a bifurcated situation now, because some people who've applied for permits think that they're proceeding according to these new regulations, this new law. that would now have to be repealed. So then it would be unclear what they would be proceeding on.
But the law is not actually enforceable right now.
Right, but they've
Anyway.
agreed in their building permit to proceed accordingly. But now it's not enforceable. I'm just beginning to feel the confusion in the situation.
But that's caused on the part of NYSERDA, not us.
Correct,
And I,
correct, yeah.
yeah, and I guess that one of the questions I have, Ed, is you mentioned a 2 to 3 month period, but could we not actually update the analysis and let the new town board members actually have a view into, give us a more detailed look, and we could perhaps
Right.
move faster?
Because we just saw this, so, we're not here to rubber stamp, but we want to understand what we're doing.
At minimum,
Responsible
but-
thing to do.
refresh on what was done before, so we're aware of it, right? If there
Exactly.
was.
Now, what would happen if we were to act on this next week?
What would happen?
So if I may, I understand the board's need to understand what this is all about. And we can put together a package of information and even have a representative of NYSERDA come and talk to you as we did last time, so that they're ready to answer a lot of the implementation questions, the cost questions, the impact questions that you're asking tonight. And we can try and arrange that for whichever of your next meetings you would like it to happen at. Happy to do that. It doesn't have to be 2 or 3 months, but to give you the information sooner rather than later, so you have time to look into it.
I think we should do that. And realistically, whether it's modified because we've now been asked to modify it, or it's repealed, we still need a public hearing. This is considered new legislation no matter which route we take. So it couldn't be done next week anyway. It probably couldn't be done before April,
Well, you can,
right? Because you need need notice for a public meeting, so it's not going to be next week, it would be in 2 weeks.
let me suggest this. Let me speak to Tom. Let us get an understanding as to what's in the pipeline in terms of building permit applications, and we'll come back to the board with an update on that piece. And in the meantime, we'll also work on bringing the board the updated information that would be appropriate, so you can make an informed decision.
Great.
Okay, and
Thank you.
Jennifer, when we have NYSERDA come, I'd love to have you or someone else from the SAB there as well.
Okay. I just want to say it would be unfortunate, since the previous board did adopt New York Stretch Code and was looking to reduce energy usage by the adoption, that if it is repealed and construction is underway where they don't have to follow it, I just think that would be unfortunate.
I agree, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but it seems that there's a concern, and it's a valid concern about costs, which are likely going to be more because of inflation. So whatever the costs were last year, it's going to be more. So I understand that concern, but without putting words in people's mouth, I think that's a big hurdle for the board, because there's a financial impact, more so than last year, more so likely than that 1 or 2% is my assumption, but we'll get that
Of
information.
financial impact and significant supply chain issues. I just read today that China just shut down every single factory again. So there are significant issues with, supply chain as well. So that concerns me, as well as the increased cost. So I just want to make sure we have this information. But I hear what you're saying, Jennifer, and look, I voted in favor of it last time. So, but I just want to make sure that we're looking at this appropriately before we make any changes that need to be made.
But also, just to be clear, let's assume that we had all the information, we were prepared to pass the law, we would still need the public hearing. So would we still be in time to make an April deadline with a public hearing? I'm just trying to see.
Is it
Jennifer,
early April?
April when exactly? April 1st or the end of April?
I'm sorry?
What date?
What date do you need to apply by? Because given that we need to have a public hearing,
Oh, I think it's April 6th.
So we wouldn't make it anyway.
I don't know that we would make that anyway, because we do have requirements of a public hearing. And where's the calendar over there? I mean, our next meeting is the 22nd, and I don't think that's enough time. So the next meeting we could have would be in April already.
Right, it would be April.
5th.
April 5th is
5th.
our next is probably the meeting where we could have a public hearing on that.
And approve if the board felt comfortable.
Right.
Right, open, close, vote. Would-
Right, and that would assume there were no comments and we voted on it the same day that we opened the hearing.
I would say that's certainly doable. It's not a new piece of legislation, certainly to be modified in some capacity, but it's something that's already been approved and made available to the public, assuming that the changes are limited in scope.
The changes are technical, and you
Yeah, so
have
it's
them. They're-
not
It's
a-
already been teed
Yeah,
up.
It's already been vetted. That's my.
Folks, I'm sorry, I have to run to my other meeting.
Bye,
Have a
Sabrina,
good
thank you
night.
so much for your time.
Thanks,
Sorry.
Aye.
Well, do you think that
So
it
let's
would make
get us,
sense?
well, let's get, I think that at least the three of you need to be educated on this before you can make a decision on this. So let's see how fast we can get NYSERDA here and how fast the, the SAB can present. I know Ken did that already, so he should be fully up to speed on that. I think it was Ken, right?
Yeah.
No, but who came from the SAB? Wasn't it Ken Thomas?
No, I don't think so.
Oh,
Was Bill
think
from
it was.
NYSERDA, right? Bill? Was it Bill from?
So as soon as we can get them to come, let's do that.
Would it make sense to put a public hearing on,
When they
prior
come,
to our deciding that we want to pursue? I mean,
we need a public hearing anyway, but I think,
right,
I
but to
think,
put that into motion.
well, I don't think we're going to vote on something the same night you obtain
Well,
information about it.
can you have a public hearing for legislation that we haven't decided? We haven't decided if we're repealing or modifying. So how can
Right,
you
that's the question.
have a public
Right,
hearing?
we need to put out the proposed legislation, correct?
You have to
And it's more
decide
than
which
just-
So
direction we're
the
going.
legislation has to be written.
Yes.
Well, you
For
have
the
it in your
public
packet.
hearing.
The
Yes.
legislation, it's written, and 5 days is the minimum, but it has to be published.
Well, but again-
So that's a
again, that-
Christina question. I don't know that, we're assuming that it can be published.
But the legislation that is written is assuming it's going to be amended. If the
Right.
board hasn't decided which route they're going yet,
Well, it
you
still
can't put
repeals-
out legislation for a
Well,
public hearing if you don't know what the legislation, is it going to be A or B?
Well, right, but the legislation repeals the current one and then amends the second.
No, but Jill, we may decide to repeal and not amend. In which
I
case, that's
understand,
one.
then you could always,
That's one piece of legislation. The other would be to amend. And the point I'm trying to understand is, do we need to hold notice a public hearing for legislation that the board has decided to pursue?
so it's my understanding that the legislation currently does both. It repeals your current legislation,
Part of it.
yeah, part of
And-
it,
and
whatever
amend-
the
and
issue is,
amends
and
part.
amends it.
Right, but if the board decides to only repeal, then we would be noticing a public hearing on legislation we haven't decided to adopt.
Yeah, you can't notice a public hearing until you know what law
Okay,
you're going
that's
to
fine.
adopt.
I'm just curious, would the board repeal this regardless? And I'm assuming the answer is no. So my view is you're just continuing. Why repeal? I would assume we wouldn't bring this up and look to repeal the legislation because now with supply chain issues and inflation, we would still keep it on the books.
Maybe
and
not.
Whatever if it was done correctly, I'm talking about. So I don't know why this town board would decide to say, now we're going to repeal, other than the fact that there's a mistake due to someone else, someone else that's beyond our control.
Well,
No,
it's not enforceable.
Right. That's I'm looking at the bigger picture, meaning why the board would repeal something that's already on the books, assuming it was worked and it was not an issue in terms of its enforcement. This board would not say, we have supply chain issues. I don't think we would. We have inflation issues. We're going to repeal this to make it easier for people to develop and build, and whatever happens, happens. I would assume that we would recognize there may be more difficulties, but we would still keep this on the book. So I'm looking at it in that way, that there's no reason to remove.
But
something
I
so
wasn't,
repeal.
but I didn't approve it last time. So my point is, I want to understand it a little better. And to me, if I were in this seat 6 months ago, and the broader conditions in the economy were where they are, I might not have approved it. So to me, it's almost like another bite at the apple. I wasn't there for the first bite of the apple. So I totally take your point. If the board that approved this last year were sitting here today and saying, gosh, things have gotten a lot worse. Inflation's running a lot hotter than we thought it was. The supply chain issues haven't abated. Let's go ahead and repeal the stretch code. I don't know whether the prior board would do that. I'm guessing probably not. But I'm sitting here being asked to approve legislation right now that I wasn't there for before. So I sort of look at this as a holistic review. And to your point, I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I want to see the information, and I want to see the information the board understood and relied on last year, because it's changed. The time
Could I just also jump in for a second? This was approved in December. So we're not talking like this was approved 6 months ago, 9 months ago. The board approved this in December. And here we are sitting in March, and you're potentially talking about repealing something.
But Jennifer, it's a different board. This board, the majority of this board.
I understand it's a different board, but boards generally don't take away what a previous board has done.
But,
so I'm a little bit struggling with what you're doing.
Sorry, Jennifer, just 2 quick points there. One, I'm guessing the board didn't consider it and adopt it in December. I'm guessing it was October. So it was a good 6 months ago when this was first raised and considered. Things have in fact changed quite rapidly. We were told up until just a couple of months ago inflation was transitory. The chairman of the Federal Reserve even said that, and certainly the president said it. We now know that's not the case. Inflation was running at 4 to 5%. Now it's at 8%, and it could go higher. And there's a war in Europe right now. So things have changed quite rapidly, I guess is the second point. And then the third point is, in fact, it is a new board. We haven't decided sort of on our own volition to go and repeal this. Our hand has been forced. And so to me, as a prudent fiduciary, I think it's the responsible thing to do. And if, frankly, if that jeopardizes an April deadline, I'm less concerned about that than I am making sure I have all the information before we make a decision. And I'm not saying that we won't move heaven and earth to get there, and hopefully we can. But to me, that's a more important, those are more important considerations.
Well, I think we don't have much of a choice in terms of timing for the April deadline, unfortunately, either way. Simply the way legislation works, we can't do that. We must have a public hearing, whether we're simply amending it or repealing it, either way. So I think that had NYSERDA come back to us a month ago, this conversation might be different, because we would have time if we wanted to meet that deadline. But there shouldn't be any implication that the board is doing anything right now. All I'm trying to do is get everyone appropriate information so that then we can make a decision.
That's fine. I'm less focused on the April deadline than focused on the discussion around not doing it at all. And which is what in some ways I'm hearing, that you're talking about repealing it, and it troubles me that would be what you're discussing.
I think we're just, I want to make sure everyone has all the appropriate information to make an informed decision, is really where we are right now. So, nothing's happening today, nothing's happening next week. We're going to get the information so that the board can make an informed decision based on that, and then we'll move forward from there. But I think part of being a leader is asking those right questions, making sure you're making decisions based on facts and current evidence, and that's what we're going to do.
I guess from my perspective, I wasn't necessarily thinking of repeal. I was thinking of the supply chain and inflationary headwinds, and if that would get in the way of development that's occurring now. So to me, it was just a question of timing rather than repeal.
So let's get the information, and we will make that decision. I think we've all said the same thing 10 times already. So, that's what was concerning me, is that I don't want people to not be able to complete projects as well because of supply chain issues. But look, NYSERDA may say that's not a problem, that everything is here that we need, and then that question is answered. So let's get that information from NYSERDA as quickly as we can get them here, and we'll keep this moving along as quickly as we can.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jen.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
your
Okay.
time.
Okay.
Tom, thanks so much.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thanks, Tom.
Ed, you had an update for me, whatever it is. on
Hudson
the-
Wellness. So Sabrina and Jen Gray from my office are collaborating on a letter. It's in draft. We are looking to circulate that tomorrow and get some feedback from the board and then push it out.
So, just one quick thing while we're talking about that. I know I had said I was going to attend the meeting of their planning board, but I didn't realize it's on the night of a town board meeting, so that will be impossible. But I think once we come to a consensus, I would like to ask members of the Millwood West End Advisory Board if someone can attend that, and I know someone from our planning department will attend as well, and, you know, maybe read a statement from the town board. Perfect.
Okay. The next thing on our agenda is the local law regarding the enactment of a moratorium. Ed, can you just walk us through that, please?
So the draft local law is in the packet with one modification. That's in Section 2, Paragraph 3. I added some language based on the discussion the board had last week. Otherwise, it's the same version that the board saw last week. The map, the familiar map for the modified moratorium area is also in the packet. So if there are any other revisions, we can make them, but I think that we're ready to.
So I
Staff
just
for public
had
hearing.
one question, and that was with regard to the map. That I didn't know why the parcels on King Street are included here. So you've got where like the dry cleaner is, where. No.
No, you've got basically Desires.
Yeah,
and
Desires.
Waka, right?
They're not over 3,000 square feet
The-
anyway, so
I know, but I don't know why it's included there anyway. The 3-11, 12, and 13.
This is the map from, literally identical map from last year. The discussion is a little hazy for me in terms of exactly where the lines were drawn at that time, but the bottom line is the board can draw them wherever you like today.
I seem to recall that that may have been the original map, but that the board had shrunk the area so that it didn't include the town parking lot. My directions are really bad, so forgive me. I believe as you're going north on North Greeley, it started perhaps at the Verizon building on that side, moving north.
Yeah, I mean, so this is for, definitely, I know when we were looking at the form-based code, we wanted to exempt out the town-owned land, which was the parking lot, because that could be subject to a charrette, for instance. But if this is just considering the moratorium, I would propose ending it after 3-10.
Basically properties that front on North Greeley.
Right,
So not the one on the corner. And then on
correct.
lower-
And the
lower-
same on the south, all of those stores.
So stop at 1122.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Actually, I think 1128, Ed, would.
Okay.
And then otherwise, I was good with the law itself. Anyone else have any
Yeah,
changes
I have
to
a
the law?
question with the map, though. What about, because the map I have shows the red section only on the east side of North Greeley. What about the,
No.
No, that's
Okay.
all.
Train tracks.
1121 is
oh,
right
those are the
in.
train tracks,
at
sorry,
Hudson.
I
Look
thought,
at Hudson.
yeah, okay. All right, I'm good. Yep.
All right, so
Okay.
we'll make that change, and we'll make sure that it's attached to the local law, but there is a resolution that would schedule the public hearing.
Okay.
Great.
And we're scheduling that today, correct?
Is the, we had put it down for April 26th. Is that, and the reason we push it out that
Yeah.
far is because it needs to be referred to the planning board, county planning board, and the Newcastle planning board. And
But can't we have a public hearing while it's referred?
that's why I remember this conversation on, so we can. But you could open it and then just keep it open. It's up to the board.
I'd like to open it sooner. And then we can keep it open until we get I'm always in favor of more public comment if possible, so I prefer to open it, hear from them, and then we can adjourn it until we hear from the agencies to which we've referred
So we only
it.
have 3 meetings in April, so we can push it up to the 19th, but we're not meeting on the 12th.
Well, what's today, March 15th? That's the
You
work
want-
session is the first week of April, the 5th?
Yeah, I mean,
Or is it a public meeting?
I think when we did it originally, we knew you weren't going to be here because you were going to be at Cortland, so we didn't schedule it. So that was what.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was a town board meeting that night, so I would do it for, is the 5th a work session or a meeting?
It's supposed to be a work session, but we don't have a meeting the following week because.
Oh,
of
so we'll do
break.
both.
So the
Right.
only, yeah, I mean, we could do it. It's just that you would have had 3 public hearings on the moratorium. Yeah. By
That's
the time
okay.
you get,
Well, maybe they'll get back to us quickly.
Westchester County Planning Board. You are optimistic.
I don't think the planning board even meets until, I don't think they meet the first Tuesday. It's,
All right, well, let's set it for the 5th, and we'll, maybe they want to meet before that.
I don't see why it hurts.
Doesn't,
To hear
it doesn't
from the
hurt.
public?
We can always wait.
Okay.
Okay.
So Jill, we have no meetings the week of the 18th, right? That's
No, we have no meeting the week of the 12th,
week of the 12th. Got it. Okay.
11th.
Got it.
There's no meeting on that Tuesday.
School break.
Yeah, school break. Got it. Perfect. Thanks.
Okay, moving on to temporary signs. Do you want to?
Well, there's a draft in the packet. It's a simple change, but I imagine there's going to be some questions and discussion among the board members with respect to some of the parameters in this language. So, for example, the 90 consecutive days, the height
I'm
and
sorry,
size of the...
Could I interrupt for just a moment? So Kerry just reminded me, there's a reason, okay, so right now, the executive order is going to expire tomorrow that allows the planning board to be meeting virtually, not just the planning board, but all elected boards. So I'm assuming, going out on a limb here, that that's not going to be renewed, and if that's the case, the planning board isn't here. And so our public hearing for the 5th would be in the conference rooms, and we would be managing it ourselves. So I'm just concerned with the capacity of the room if a lot of people come out for the moratorium, that we can't accommodate them. That's up to you. We would be doing it ourselves. Carrie would be in here with the planning board. They've got their public hearings, and we would be in the conference room.
I'm venturing to guess we're not going to get a land swell of people.
You sure? Okay.
Yes.
Just all fairness. Okay, great. It's not a matter of chairs, John. It's a matter of fitting.
It's COVID, and yeah. Okay. Look, if it's really out of control, we can always adjourn it. No, that's
Not at all. So I have spoken to Tom DePole about some of the parameters in here, and he had some input, but, with respect to the size of the sign, the idea that it not obstruct sight lines, but, ultimately, and the board may want to discuss just overall policy here. The way this is drafted, it would permit temporary signs. A temporary sign is a sign that announces a temporary event. You know, it's not a message. It's something that happens on a particular date or days. So that's a distinction. But in terms of where it's permitted, the proposed local law would say in town rights of way. Right? You can't regulate what happens in the right of way on a state or county road. But for example, if a resident wanted to put a sign at the edge of their property and there was some uncertainty as to whether they were on their property or actually in the public right of way, that this amendment would take that essentially off the table. There wouldn't be that concern, because even if you were in the right of way, it would be permissible if it was a temporary sign.
Okay. So the reason this is on the agenda is because we had this law in our books, and last year certain members of the old board decided to enforce this. And in the enforcement, I think many of us, which I'm not going to get into, know why it was chosen to be enforced at the time. But while it was being enforced, I think there were actually unintended consequences. So the way it's drafted now would mean the farmer's market cannot put up a sign saying the market is this weekend. It means the Greeley sports boosters cannot put up a sign saying that there was a football game Saturday night. So there were a lot of things, and because we have to enforce everything equally, we could not legally say, okay, well, you can leave up the farmer's market sign, but you have to take down, a political sign or whatever it may be. We couldn't do that. So I wanted the board to really look at how we can revise our sign code so that we really can find an appropriate balance between making sure that our town is not inundated with random signs everywhere, but balance that with the need to push out relevant information as well as events and other things that serve a public purpose. So that's really where I asked council to look at it. Now, I would suggest a few changes to this proposed law right now. So one of the things I was thinking, and something that troubled me, and I know it troubled many residents, was, and I'm sure it troubled Tom DePaul there too, is we were asking, telling people you cannot put a sign in the right of way, even if it's on your adjacent to your property, which meant that residents had to say, well, does my property line start 1 foot back from the road? Does it start 3 feet back from the road? Some places are different. Poor Tom, was going to have to come with a measuring tape everywhere and figure this out. So I would propose to the board that we say temporary signs are allowed, or any signs, frankly, because they're messaging signs. People may decide they want a Black Lives Matter sign on their lawn or whatever their sign may be, that those should be allowed in the right-of-way as long as that right-of-way is attached to your residential property, which would mean that Tom does not, so if my sign, and as long as obviously it doesn't, there's no safety concerns. It's not blocking, sight lines, or it's not in the way of plows, things like that, obviously. But in terms of enforceability, if somebody has a sign a little closer to the road and somebody has a sign a little further back, I didn't want there to be issues where now DPW is tasked with coming around and picking up signs that are essentially people believe are on their own property. Now that's not, I don't think signs, at least messaging signs that aren't associated with an event but are just messaging, should be in public areas, so islands, anything that's blatantly a public area, the island in front of, the median in front of, on Roaringbrook Road in front of the high school, the big triangle by Lawrence Farm South, all those intersections, those I think should not be included. I think if you have a messaging sign, you can put that on your own private property, nobody's gonna stop that. I do think, though, that we should be allowing event signs on public property, because to the extent that there is a Greeley football game, I want our high school to be able to advertise that. When the farmer's market is going to be in the market on Saturday, I want them to be able to put up a sign saying the market's going to be there Saturday. So, but those would all be attributable to events. And then we can limit the amount of time those are allowed to be up before an event and how quickly they need to be taken down after an event. I would propose here the 7 days that's proposed in this law is actually too long, because something like the farmer's market, for instance, that's there every week, if they have 7 days to take it down, then they never need to take it down because it's every 7 days. So I would propose, for instance, that no one needs more than 3 days to take a sign down for an event. I know, the sports boosters take theirs down right after an event for the most part. I think even if it's an election, they should be down within 3 days after an election. So that's my proposal, but obviously this is a work session. We're not making decisions today. For everyone watching, this is our first discussion on this. We are just talking. And I also think 90 days prior to an event is way too long. So, I think the signs that are probably up the longest are for elections. Those don't need to be up for 90 days. My proposal would be 30 days before an event, but again, that's sort of open to discussion. To me, no one really wants to be inundated with signs for any event for 90 days. So those are some thoughts that I had, and I had more notes, but I left them in my office. But I open that up for public discussion as to what everyone else's thoughts are.
Well, I agree with all of those thoughts, including the 30 days. I think 30 days is long enough for signs to be up. So all the points you made are points that I'd like to see as well. I don't really have anything to add other than I'm just hoping that the events distinction doesn't fall into the category of regulating the content of speech, as opposed to like an election sign.
Well, an election sign is an event because there's a date that there's an election. So that would fall into an event. I'm thinking messaging signs are more signs, and frankly, look, we saw them. Save Chappaqua Hamlet signs, that's a messaging sign. Okay. If you want to put up a Black Lives Matter sign, that's a messaging sign. Any sign you want to put on your property that's not associated with an actual event that's occurring on a particular date. A statement, yes.
So commercial sign.
Advertising an event. How does that fall?
So if it's...
There's a carnival, or there's a... Oh, sorry.
There's a benefit, there's a carnival, there's a, something like that.
I think there we can't regulate, so we would allow those signs. But if it's just an advertisement, Joe's, plumbing, those are not allowed, except on personal property.
Yeah, the content neutrality is exceedingly tricky, obviously. I don't know, Ed, what in the prior legislation, what had been done historically. The other sections in here, because this legislation that's in here is not the entire thing, right?
Right, that's not everything that the town code
This is just
says
exempt
with
signs.
respect to
Right.
towns.
So,
Right,
so
but
the
signs-
the preceding sections of this would say signs are prohibited on the public right of way, and then these are the exempt signs.
Right, and that was the default rule,
Right.
and is the default rule. This is the change that would be implemented, or the exemption.
But I'm
so the other-
proposing changing the
other-
right-of-way part,
Right.
too.
Understood. The other categories that are here, though, public notice or warning, sale of a property, contractor's identification, those were exemptions historically. And what happened last year basically was that, as a matter of practice, people were putting political signs, and that was what was enforced. Just to, right, refresh the history here. Got it. Okay. Do we have a definition for event in here? C1.
Up the top, temporary signs intended to be in connection with a particular event.
Understood, but do we
What about
say
a repeat event?
when an event? Yeah, I mean, Lisa
about a
mentioned the
repeat that comes every
farmer's
week?
market. If you took it down 3 days, but you have the ability to put it up for 30 consecutive days prior to the event, how do those two jive with
That's
each
a good
other?
question.
That's a good question.
Yeah,
These are all questions.
these are, this is a subject that lawyers love to hate, municipal
Yes.
lawyers love to hate.
I know.
Because it's tricky, and look, there's not going to be a perfect solution. You get it as the legislation as good as you can make it, but I guarantee you that a sign will come along that all of us are not going to anticipate, and it's not going to quite fit in what we're talking.
So the Supreme Court case that we talked about earlier, which was from 7 years ago or so, are there other cases, precedents, presumably in the Second Circuit, that potentially would be binding in New York that might be helpful as well? Because that precedent was pretty inconclusive, frankly, unfortunately.
Yeah, in terms of teasing out the distinction between the majority opinion in Reed and the concurring opinion that we talked about, answer is no. There's one case that I'm aware of that lends support to the idea that Justice Alito's concurring opinion is the one that seems to be taking root with respect to temporary signs. The majority opinion took a very hard line in terms of not allowing municipalities to draw any kind of distinction, and that the only thing that you could regulate would be size, illumination, material, things of that nature.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at with the event,
I think we all
the event distinction that we were trying to make. I guess one unanticipated event that could happen is someone could just put up a political sign and just put a date on it.
Right.
Say,
That's why I
"Get
say
together."
defining event is
And,
going to be critical.
Yeah. But I think that people who bother to put up signs here have, clear intent and aren't trying to,
Yeah.
do
understood.
something nefarious. So, I think it's not going to be perfect, as you say.
Never. I don't think this is actually able to be regulated where it's going to cover every option. I
Yeah,
think it's
yeah.
impossible. I think we're just kind of tasked with doing the best we can to obtain the results that we're actually looking for, and hope for the best a little bit and modify as necessary.
Like the social
Yeah.
media policy.
Right. Any other thoughts?
No, but I will say that I appreciate the decrease from 90 days. I think that's an excessive amount.
Yeah. Agreed. Thank you.
And then is there a consensus that we also want to narrow this to the situation where it's adjacent to a residential property as opposed to just anywhere?
I think Lisa was suggesting. Off again. I think Lisa was suggesting for event signs, it could be anywhere. But for messaging signs, we would effectively say the right-of-way adjacent to private property, for purposes of this legislation, is effectively not considered the right-of-way. That's sort of what you're saying, right? So that
As
nobody.
long as there's not a safety concern.
Yeah, understood. That's always the case, right? Even now, if someone put a 30-foot sign 6 feet off of 117, that theoretically would be a problem. So, point being, though, that if it's on private property adjacent to private property, we're effectively not just defining event in this legislation, we're defining what the right-of-way is.
Got it.
Can I ask a question? So when you talk about right-of-way, is that just the right-of-way of your house? Or anybody can put them on the right-of-way in front of my house?
Well, that's,
No, you can put them, no, okay. I meant you can put a sign on your own property if it's in the right-of-way on your property, because I don't want to make people have to come out with measuring tape essentially, or make Tom have that. It's not intended to mean I can put my sign on the right-of-way in front of your property.
right, but I think that, again, raises the question, defining event, defining right-of-way will now have to be defined as the 3 feet, next to the curb, adjacent to a private zoned property, et cetera. It's going to have to be
That
defined.
you own in a residential neighborhood.
What if you lease? I don't know. I mean, it starts to get tricky, right? So I just think we probably, I don't know whether we
In which you
workshop this.
reside.
Think about this one.
I also want to,
What if you own it and it's a commercial property?
I also want to
No,
speak
in
to
the
Tom
residential neighborhood.
about enforcement. Because I also want to speak to Tom about enforcement. And we can do that right now, but
Yeah.
this is going to fall on him.
Well, on that note,
He does have his hand up, by the way.
oh, yeah, but just to add the question then, on that note, when this, I guess, dormant law was resurrected last fall, how was enforcement handled? I really don't remember. I know many people said signs were being picked up, and then there were signs up, and there were signs in the train station and so forth. Like, what was the sort of the I guess Jill and Tom can say, what was the were the findings of how that went, I guess?
And I know I was CC'd on some emails that people were sending saying, you have to take these signs down, and I think poor Tom got the brunt of that.
He and Steve Davis, certainly. But Tom, you're on mute.
Tom, yeah.
Oh, should
No,
not
we
be
hear you,
on
we
mute.
hear you.
Okay.
Okay. Extrapolating on what Jill said before on her property, we had a lot of.
Hang on, Tom, 1 second. Carrie, can we make him a little louder? Okay.
Try again.
Okay, extrapolating on what Jill said earlier, we had a lot of piggyback signs. So once one sign went up, a lot of other signs went left and right in, comparison to and competition to. So does the homeowner have the right to pull those other signs, or is the building department getting called to pull the signs that were not being put there by the owner in their supposedly town right-of-way approvals? And I would also request humbly that can we set a minimum setback from the road, so that we've had situations where the cars were hitting the signs with their bumpers because they were that close to the road. Can like a 5-foot setback be mandatory, where at least there is some safety measures?
Is that the right of, what is the right of way on a private property?
I think it changes, right, depending on the width of the road and.
Right, 30 feet from the center
So
line.
I don't mind Tom's suggestion, just to say blanket, it's got to be at least 3 feet from the edge of your property.
Sure.
We can use a blacktop edge as our border because everyone's going to have a blacktop or a gravel edge. At least we have a consistency and some level of safety.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I would also request if we can keep the height of the site down to something less than what the line of sight measurements that New York State usually goes by, and we can consult with the town engineer, but I believe it's 42 inches off the ground where a car coming to an intersection needs to see over. So if we can cap out maybe at 3 feet or less off the ground level, maybe that could be a good trade-off where we could have at least people seeing around corners and down the road.
Yeah. There's a section, not in what's here, but about size of signs in our legislation, so we should just make sure that that complies with that. I think, Tom, that last year was a little interesting because, look, it came at a time when people were frankly annoyed that this was suddenly getting enforced. And I think that you were getting those piggybacking of signs because people felt, well, if they're going to avoid the law, then I'm going to put my sign right next to it, and let's see, they have to either take down both signs, because if they take down one sign, then clearly, they're biased toward one political candidate's views. I mean, really, that's where it was coming from. It wasn't, it was mostly political signs. No one was putting up a sign that, they're selling lemonade at the farmer's market, and people were there were no piggyback signs, I'm selling iced tea. It was really the political sign. So I think if we now know this year and we have specific guidelines and how it's going to be enforced for everyone, and they're frankly appropriate, and they get to sort of the public purpose of wanting people to be able to put up these signs versus making sure our town doesn't look like a junkyard, I think it'll be a lot clearer, and I would hope that it would be a lot more manageable and well-run.
So, Tom, I'm just thinking to myself about the roofer wars
Go ahead.
and those signs. So we had an instance, Lisa, where they were not political signs. There were two roofing companies that were going at it. And
Yes, they still are, and we keep pulling their
But those
signs.
would be messaging signs that wouldn't be allowed, those would only be allowed on your private property.
And they're also contractor signs, so they could have them under the exemption for contractor on their private property.
I'm sorry?
Say again, Tom.
The roofing companies and any contractor can put a sign on a property that they're working on to give location to deliveries. So, in the case, they are allowed under the exempt signs now for identification.
Well, right, on your personal property, if you're having construction done on your house, they
Correct.
can have a property, but it's your property. So if I have Bob the contractor and I have his sign on my property because Bob the contractor's doing work at my house, I'm not going to allow Joe the contractor to put up a sign because it's on my private property. So you're not going to have that
Understood, but,
dueling.
Yeah, that wasn't the problem. The problem was they were taking every intersection and putting both signs in competition.
Right, but we're not allowing those type of messaging signs on kind of public intersections.
Right, we don't allow them now. We've been pulling them right along.
Right. So that wouldn't change.
Understood.
All right, so so then what are next steps here?
We'll come back with a red line that'll incorporate these changes and workshop it again.
Okay? All right, sounds good.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Very welcome. Have a good evening.
You too.
See you.
Okay, now moving on to the exciting world of finances.
Hi, good evening.
Thank you.
Is that when you're leaving?
Thank you. Hey, Rob.
Never fails, right?
Don't take it personally.
What did you say, Rob?
He does take it personally.
I was going to mention how in my financial review, it's going to be kind of a broad overview as opposed to a granular overview because I think I put people to sleep, but there's really nobody to put to sleep, so
We're still here.
I guess
no,
I
I'm
can
kidding.
talk all night, right? So good evening. First, before I talk about the financial information, I kind of want to circle back to a discussion we had a couple weeks ago and just offer the board the opportunity to ask any questions they may have. And this relates to the 2021 goals and objectives that we had provided the board at the beginning of the year, kind of an update on what Jill, myself, and the town staff had been working on for the last year. I recirculated that list the other day, and we had that discussion. We were able to review most of those, but didn't really have an opportunity due to time constraints to field any answer any questions from you. So just wanted to give you an opportunity if anybody had any questions or wanted to dig deeper into any of those topics, we could do that. No? Everyone's good? I would like to ask the board to kind of start thinking about formulating your own goals and objectives. This kind of directs Jill, myself, and the staff kind of points us in the right direction to prioritize our tasks. And I think it's helpful for the residents as well to kind of let them know what we're working on. And I do typically come in front of the board 2, 3, 4 times a year to update this. So, over the next couple of months, as you become acclimated, maybe we could start, we'll revisit that, and these can be your goals and objectives instead of the prior boards.
That sounds great.
So why don't we can we plan to discuss that in like a month? At our work session,
I think I'd asked
Last
it the
one in
last time.
April?
You do this typically quarterly, sort of a check-in, is that?
Yeah, it's not hard and fast. Last year was between COVID and between the form-based code really taking a lot of the focus. It wasn't maybe exactly quarterly, but try to do at least 3 times a year.
I think doing something in April after we finish the first quarter and we've all been
Sure.
here for 3 months makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
So I've put it down for April 19th.
Great.
that's perfect.
Sure. So moving on to the financial information. Typically this time of year, and again, as with the goals and objectives, I would typically meet with the board several times a year, often quarterly, to give an update on the financial situation that the town is in. It's kind of early in the year right now to report on anything that's happened in 2022. We really haven't paid any bills yet, and we really don't have much in the way of revenue coming in yet. So I really wouldn't give an update on the first quarter, although based on kind of a question, email back and forth I had with Councilmember Hildenbrand, I'll kind of cover where I think we're going in 2022. But to recap 2021, it was a difficult year, kind of to forecast. About maybe 16, 18 months ago when we started working on the 2021 budget, if you'll remember, we were kind of really coming out of, I guess, the first phase of COVID and not really sure what to expect revenue-wise. Were we going to be able to sell any parking permits? Were we going to have summer camp? Mortgage tax, sales tax, how were those things going to be? So really the good news is that all of that kind of came in much better than we expected. So I'll kind of just go over the 4 major funds that we have, and the general fund in particular is the biggest fund that encompasses most of the town. So just looking at that at a really high level, where we are right now is the revenues came in about $1.3 million overall over budget, and there were a couple drivers there. Number one was the mortgage tax, which was just phenomenal. Total mortgage tax we took in for the year was $2.1 million. Very rarely, if ever, we had, I think we did exceed $1 million a time or two since I've been here, but it's typically right between that 900,000 and $1 million mark, and that's where we had it budgeted for 2021. I think little did we know at that time we were going to have such a boom. I think residents kind of fleeing the city and kind of heading north, and we've got a great landing spot here, and I'm pretty sure all the real estate agents could tell you their business was booming this time of year, this time last year. So, the mortgage tax, that was one thing that came in significantly over budget. County sales tax came in about almost $4.3 million. That was, again, at budget time, it was hard to know where that was going to go. We were shut down for several months. We didn't know if we'd be shut down again for several months. But I think, a couple of the, I guess, the policies of the current administration, there's a lot of cash floating around. So you had 2 or 3 different stimulus packages, I think, and you had a child tax credit at the end of last year. So I think all of that had a lot of money circulating, and I think the county sales tax numbers bear that out. There was a lot of money being spent, and the town got their share of that revenue. Just one other item I'd like to point out that came in higher than budget, the police protection line. And typically all that we budget in that line is the reimbursement from the school district for the school resource officer. But last year we had Con Ed doing a significant amount of work in the town. I think anybody that drove on, they were on Campfire Road and hardscrabble, I think, and anybody that lives or drives over there knew they were there for a couple months, but they actually have to reimburse us for our police officers out there. So, we came in about $210,000 over budget on that police protection line, and that was due to the reimbursements we got from Con Ed and I think various other utilities. Verizon we got a little bit of money from too. So that was the good news. There was a little bad news as far as the revenue goes. Summer camps, we operated at about half capacity. Brought in about $255,000 in revenue, but we're typically between $450 and $550. So, we didn't run probably the most popular camp, which is the on-the-go camp, and I think that's our most popular and the biggest revenue driver. So, without that, we still ran a very successful camp. And I'll say on the other side, we didn't bring the revenue in, but they also didn't spend the money either. So, we did have that problem years and years ago when I first came here. And, there was one particularly bad year that we went out and hired a ton of camp counselors, and nobody came to camp that year. And we paid the camp counselors to kind of, I don't know what the ratio was, probably about 6 counselors per kid or something like that. But probably the one year we were upside down. But I think Ike's done a great job kind of managing that. And, he kind of hires, he looks at the registration, the enrollment before he makes final decisions on hiring. And I think that's a lot more prudent than it had been in the past. The parking permits came in not terrible. We budgeted last year. We expected to go down. We typically have about $950,000. We ended up bringing in $485,000, but compared to budget, not bad. We had estimated $500,000, so we weren't really far off of that number. I think it was helped pushing that out to December. Had we tried to collect that in June when we typically do, nobody would have bought permits then. So I think that helped us to come close to our goal. And parking meter revenue was off significantly. It was off about 52%. We only brought in 71,000 compared to about 150, 160 that we typically bring in. So, we're seeing the parking lot fill up now, and I think Christina will say she's sold a lot of permits, and at least for now, it looks like people are heading back to work in the city. So, we look for that to continue. So the revenue numbers were good. And I will tell you the expense numbers were pretty good as well. When the pandemic first hit, Jill and myself met with the prior board, with Supervisor Katz and Councilmember Sland, and we really took a close look at expenditures in the town. We had budgets for things, but we really looked at, did we need them at that time? And vehicle purchases, could they be put off? Hiring decisions, could they be put off? So we really scrutinize, and you'll see that we bring to the board often things that we think are of note. They may be budgeted, but we just feel like expenditures that are over $10,000, you should know about them. And we've continued to do that, but that careful eye has really allowed us to kind of control expenses, and we were actually about $900,000 under budget expenditure-wise. I'll point out these numbers are unaudited numbers. My audit actually begins next week, so the auditors do make adjustments to some of these numbers. Sometimes there can be big adjustments. Some of them have to do with our self-insured health plan, whether there's a balance, whether we had a surplus or a deficit in that for the year. They also make a pretty significant adjustment based on the amount of outstanding tax liens that we have. They make an entry for an allowance for those outstanding taxes, and we kind of thought we were going to get 48 Hates Cross in the fold at the end of the year, and that didn't come off. So we still have a big number there. But just to summarize a couple of the expenditures and how we were able to stay under budget. One of the bigger ones was property tax refunds. We had upped that. We typically budget $100,000 a year. Last year we went to $150,000. We're expecting the 2 golf course tax certs to come in. We did get the first one. The second one didn't make it in, but we ended up only spending $88,000 out of that $150,000. So we did pretty well in that regard. And we dropped that budget back to $100,000 this year, and we're pretty comfortable. We don't have anything other than the one golf course, we don't have anything huge on the horizon as far as tax certs. Josh is kind of able to tell pretty far out, months in advance, whether he thinks something is close to settling or whether there's anything that large in the pipeline. You know, I mentioned town camps before. You know, we were at revenue-wise, we were only at about half of our revenue that we were looking to realize, but expenditures, we were 49% of budget. So we did an excellent job controlling that. Had some good numbers with our employee benefits. Police retirement actually came in about $141,000 less than estimated. That number is kind of odd. They take a snapshot on April 1st. The retirement contribution that the town has to make each year, whether for the police or for the employees' retirement system, it's based on a snapshot of where the market is on April 1st, and sometimes it's hard to kind of estimate where that's going to go. So this year we ended up to the good. A couple of items that just exceeded budget. Police overtime did by $76,000, but as I mentioned before, we took in about 210 extra, so it really offset that increase in the police overtime. We did exceed and transfer to capital. It was $56,000, and that was our EV chargers that we've just actually installed. Everything but the train station parking lot. Is that correct, Jill? And town hall. Yep, that's right. Waiting on Con Ed for those. Probably the biggest over expenditure was in the legal line, and you'll see later on when you look at administrative items. One of the administrative items is the authorization to transfer our $150,000 contingency line to cover some of that deficit in the legal line, and you know, quite a few things contributed to that. We had significant employee disciplinary charges throughout the year. You know, I think we had some charges related to the form-based code that we didn't necessarily expect to have so much legal representation there. So, you know, that was one line that was over, but in spite of those overages, the overall expenses were still quite a bit under budget. Moving on to the highway fund. The highway fund is actually was in good shape. Not a lot of sources of revenue in the highway fund. It's basically property taxes or it's state aid, whether that comes from our contracts to remove snow and ice from either county or state roads or the CHIPS funding. So we actually exceeded CHIPS funding by about $218,000 this year. The state increased that allocation to us. And if you remember that this is the number, we have a budgeted number. It's typically about $225,000 a year. And what we always do is if we are aware, and the state makes us aware, I think, in the spring, how much we're going to receive. So when we see that we're going to get more revenue than we expected, we put that right into the paving budget. So we did that once again this year. County snow and ice, we had about $64,000 more than we were expecting. They have an odd kind of reconciliation system. So we have a contract that's based on how many miles of road that we plow for the county and the state. And then they do a reconciliation, and sometimes it's years later, where in a certain year, I think if the snow is over a certain level, if it's above, I don't know, 4 inches or 6 inches or 8 inches, we get a kind of a premium. And they don't true that up for another year or two, and sometimes it comes all at once, and that was the case this year, where we got a lump sum. I don't think we got that last year, but we got a lump sum this year. And I think the road opening permits was up by about 33,000. So those were some of the good news revenue-wise in the highway fund. Expenditure-wise, we were actually pretty close to budget. We were $15,000 below budget for the entire year. So the brush and tree work actually came in under budget. I think that I don't recall having as significant as storms as we have had in the past with Ida and some of the other big storms, which required us to remove more trees. And health insurance actually came in a little bit below budget, about $40,000. The expenditures that exceeded budget were road paving, so it kind of mirrors the revenue. We were up $218,000 in the state aid revenue, and we increased road paving by $217,000. So kind of see that mirrored right there. And vehicle maintenance and repair, 119,000. I know that we had some significant expenditures in that line. So in both the general fund and the highway fund right now, and I don't like to at this point give a specific number, but I think it's safe to say that we can project a surplus for both of those lines, which will mean money coming back into fund balance for both of those funds. If you remember, at budget time 2021, we actually allocated quite a bit more fund balance than we've ever done, or at least while I've been comptroller, that we ever did. We had estimated that we were going to use about 500,000 last year, and we ended up using 1.2 million, or allocating 1.2 million. And that was because we had some uncertainties with the revenue sources, and we were trying to stay below the tax cap. So as it turns out, we end up with a surplus, and we don't need any of that fund balance that we allocated, which is good news.
Are we going to need to use that this year, do you think?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
So what we have done, and what we will probably continue to do, you have been on the board the 8 years, and you kind of saw the whole downtown project from start to finishing. And the last time that we borrowed money, which was 2018, and we had kind of been building our reserves prior to that because we knew that there were going to be costs associated, significant costs with that downtown and borrowing money. And we had a I think it was a 5-year plan at the time through 2023, where we were going to allocate fund balance to kind of offset some of the debt service through that time period. So, I think you're going to see, once we redo the financials, or once we do the financials for this year and the fund balance totals get updated, I'll come out with another plan. It is anticipated that we're going to borrow money this year. We just need to finalize a few projects and get some real costs right now. We kind of have back of the envelope stuff, but I really don't like to borrow when I don't have a close estimate, because you either under borrow, which means you have to borrow more money, or you over borrow and you're paying interest on money that you didn't need to. So trying to get a handle on that. I'm cognizant of interest rates, and I think we were expecting a significant hike this year, and with the economy maybe slowing a little bit, I'm not sure we see what they originally had anticipated, but I think we're still probably going to be below where we were when we borrowed in 2018. So we're gonna look to borrow probably late fall and end of the year, maybe October, November, December. And then I will have, prior to that, I'll have a plan to kind of distribute some of the fund balance so that we can, complete these much needed capital projects and really not have to exceed the tax cap. That was the goal last time. It worked. I think that'll be the goal this time, and my plan is that it will work. Just a couple other, the other two major funds, the refuse fund and the water fund. Not really a significant variance in the refuse fund. There are very few revenue sources there other than the tax income. We allocated, I think it was in the, lost the number there. But we'll be right on target for the refuse fund. We had allocated, I think it was $265,000 or so in fund balance, and that's the number that it'll end up being. We were pretty close to budget estimates there. The water fund, we were short in revenue by about $868,000. We were short in expenses by $846,000, so we were pretty darn close there when you net those numbers out. Water revenue is always difficult to predict because it's dependent on the weather. So you have a particularly dry summer, you're going to sell a lot of water. You have a particularly wet summer, you're not going to. And it matters quite a bit when you see the rainfall. We have some really big water users, Hudson Hills Golf Course. That the bill for water for that golf course can be $80,000, $90,000 in a month when it's a dry month, and when it's a wet month, down to $20,000. So it can be a huge swing. So, the revenue is down, but kind of like I talked about with summer camps before, when the revenue's down, we're not spending as much expenditure-wise, so that means less chemicals, less raw water purchased, less excess per capita that we're paying to New York City. So water fund looks in pretty good shape as well. So that kind of wraps up 2021, and you know, stop for a second and ask if anybody has any particular questions before I kind of forecast where I think we're heading in 2022.
I just want to say you did a fabulous job last year, the past 2 years under the most difficult of circumstances. I mean, you were fabulous, as were you, Jill. Really a testament to you to where we are today. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and it really was a team effort. Yeah, you know, Jill and I have really worked. We have department head meetings twice a week, and we really instilled in the staff that you know, it's important to continue to monitor these expenses. And you know, we're a municipality that provides services to our residents, so there's a cost that comes with that. It's not free. Costs money to do business, but you know, just taking that extra look, do we need this, making an extra phone call to see if we can get it cheaper somewhere else, or substitute something. You know, our staff has been great at that, and I think our numbers show that.
Thank you.
So I just want to speak briefly about 2022. Councilmember Hildenbrand sent me an email this weekend, and it was actually a great question. You know, this time, or budget time last year, you know, the thought was inflation was transitory, that we weren't going to see a prolonged increase, that we were coming out of the pandemic, and maybe there were some supply chain issues, and there was some shortages, and that was leading to price hikes. And you know, once that smoothed out, we were going to be pretty much on level terms. Well, it hasn't shown to be the case at the moment, and you know, not sure what the rest of the year brings, but if we head on an 8% inflation, that's a difficult hit for anybody. But you know, I'll talk for a minute about how the town is prepared to cope with that. So we're actually positioned better than you might think to handle an 8% increase in inflation. So I'll talk first about a couple of costs where I think we're really fairly insulated from that. So, you know, the first is personnel costs. You know, they represent 30% of our overall budget. 13 million on, you know, a $44 million budget. So about 13.5 million is kind of protected. The police salaries are covered by the police contract, so that was a 2.5% increase this year. So it's not going to correlate to the 8% increase. We're still out of contract with the CSEA. We're trying to get back to the table. There have been some delays, not of our doing, but unfortunately, I think we're ready to get back to the table, and we're hoping to iron that out. But that said, we've got funds allocated in the contingency line for however that plays out. So, you know, I'm confident, you know, that segment of our budget is fairly well insulated. Another area that I think is pretty insulated are the employee benefits, and those are about 20% of our overall budget, almost $9 million. You know, our participation in MEBCO, the healthcare consortium that we've been in for many years, it just continues to benefit the town, and we were able to have a 0% increase this year. And I don't know many plans. I think the state plan, night shift plan, I think had double-digit increases this year. So, you know, we had a 0. And when you're talking, I think our premiums around $4.5 million a year, to have a 0% increase, it's pretty phenomenal. The plan has made some changes over the last few years. We have shopped around. We're part of an insurance captive right now. We have the United Network, UMR is the TPA for that, and we've been able to keep costs low, and that network really benefited when we switched over from the POMCO network to that network. They have much better discounts that they're able to negotiate with hospitals. So we're really in great shape there. So, you know, we've got health insurance that increased nothing. 220 of our employees and retirees are in that plan. We have another small plan that we've got 18 employees, retirees combined, and even that only increased 3.4%. So, that's locked in for the year, so we're in pretty good shape there. Workers' comp rates, and I understand they could be affected if rising medical costs, may affect those rates, but the primary driver in our workers' comp rates is our claims history. And over the last 8 years, again, when Supervisor Katz joined the board with at the time Supervisor Greenstein, we made the decision to switch over from one workers' comp carrier to state insurance fund. And Jill and I still kind of chuckle. We had a renewal premium that was close to $1 million for that year, and right now our premium is around $400,000. So, that was an excellent savings. Our claims history continues to be at, just phenomenal levels. We've done our broker Foe and Son, and RJ Impastato, who's actually a town resident, has been great. His firm helps us with our safety trainings, and that has definitely proven to be a benefit. And the last employee benefit that I'll talk about is the retirement system, and it's a big number. Combined with the police and fire, well, we don't pay the fire, but it's called the police and fire system, and the employees, we pay about $2 million a year in those retirement benefits. Those, as I mentioned before when I talked about the 2021 numbers, those are sometimes hard to predict. We have a prediction for this year. We did predict actually a little bit lower than last year over year. I'm hoping that stays the course. But in any case, we're prepaid through March 31st. So if there was any increase in that, it would only affect the final 9 months of the year. So, it could have an effect, but I don't think a huge effect. Just a couple other items. Contract for refuse collection. I think you all probably saw, even if you weren't on the board last year, saw some of those negotiations, and we had a 60% increase in that, which was huge. We actually rebid that twice and still came up with the same bidder and the same bid. So we didn't have a lot of choice there, but it was factored into the budget. So in spite of the fact that we had a 60% increase, that's locked in for the year. It's not affected by inflation. So we're insulated there as well. The operation of the water treatment plant, that was the biggest increase that we've had in the last couple of years. The ECI increase, I think, was about 3%, but again, that's locked in for the year. So budgetarily, we expected that. Bart knew that going into the year, and we planned for that. And then just talking about our professional services, our legal retainer, our IT consultant, website maintenance that NCCMC does, none of those things are affected by inflation. We have contractual agreements for all of those, and those costs won't go up. So, so that's the good news, or even great news, really. There are a few things that are a little bit troubling. Obviously, gasoline, diesel, and heating oil, we've seen where those are going, and the town uses a significant amount of each of those three things. That said, it's about 0.69% of our total budget. So, we're seeing increases there, but I don't think it's anything that we can't absorb. I will mention one thing, that those are on state contracts, so they do still fluctuate. It's not a set price. They fluctuate, but we don't pay taxes on that, and we're on a state contract, so whatever you're seeing at the retail, at your local gas pump, we're not seeing that at the town, not to the extent that I think retail rates are. I think we've all seen and heard in the news, the electricity rates lately have shot through the roof. We didn't really have that indication at the end of last year. I think we knew they were going up. I don't think anybody would have known that to the extent. I've heard there's some grumbling on the legislative level to try to get the utility companies to kind of take a second look at that, and I hope they're successful, because that's one, Councilmember Hildenbrand, you said, can't remember exactly what you asked, but is that some of these we're just going to have to live with, and I think that's going to be one of them. Water treatment plant chemicals is another probably another concern that we're going to have. I think we saw, was it a couple months ago, Jill, that we had to ask actually we had one of the providers, I think it was chlorine, that was unable to provide chlorine. They just couldn't get it at the rate that we were locked in, and we actually had to amend that contract.
It was still, the increased rate was still lower than the next
Yep.
higher bidder on the original contract, so we were able to stay with them. But that's just supply chain issues. You know, we're not immune.
And everybody's seen the supply chain issues. We've talked about the difficulty getting some of the vehicles and the heavy equipment for the town, and when we're able to get those, the prices are significantly higher than they were when we've purchased in the past. So, that's another area that we really have no choice. If we need the vehicle, we have to purchase it. So, with all that said, with the good and the bad, Joe and I are still reviewing and still bringing to the town board any of these large purchases to allow you all to have input and to question any of these. And I think that, we'll continue to do that. Kind of the stopgap measure for everything is we have healthy fund balances in all of our funds. So, a lot of times those are expressed as rainy day funds. And I always go back, one of the former board members, Robin Stout, used to ask me, is it raining yet? And I would tell him, no, it's not raining yet. Well, at this point, it's not raining. I don't know if it will be at the end of the year, but, I think we're positioned pretty well. And, should we exceed expense budgets in any of these, we do have the fund balance that would be able to cover that.
Rob, could you remind me what is the percentage of fund balance to the budget?
I don't recall the last one. I think it's about 32 or 33% of general fund. Fund balance for municipalities is different from school districts. I know your school districts are restrained. The town is not, but school districts also have the ability for reserves for other things that the town doesn't have reserves for. So we would have unassigned fund balance where we could allocate that money elsewhere. I know the school has reserves for, I think, employee benefits. I think you have reserves for tax surcharges.
Sure, there are many restricted reserves.
Yes, correct. So the school district restricts them. Right. The town can have more in a kind of a lump sum and allocate it however they choose. So the board at any time is free to restrict. The board has that power to restrict any amount of fund balance for a specific purpose. The auditors wouldn't suggest that you do that. You'd rather have the freedom to be able to use that money in any way that you see fit.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob.
Really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. That was really thorough and clear. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Rob is great.
See, this is why people don't worry about it, and they don't come to the budget hearings because
Right.
they know you have a handle.
We know.
Right? That we're in good hands.
I still have to laugh a couple years ago when I gave my budget presentation and the room was filled with Boy Scouts, and Rob Greenstein actually apologized to them for having them come on the night when we were talking about financial things.
That's funny.
If you're listening,
They
Rob,
stayed
thank you
awake,
for that.
Bill.
I'm at the edge of my seat.
Thank you again, Rob. That was fabulous.
I am. You're
All right. Thank you so much, Rob.
Okay, so we also have a number of administrative items: payment of claims, adoption of minutes, adoption of the monthly reports from February 2022. We've got the water rents as tax liens on the agenda for tonight. So these are water accounts that are in excess of 2 quarters.
Anything that was delinquent as of October 1st.
Sorry.
It's anything that was delinquent as of October 1st. So typically, we do have a lot of frequent flyers on that list, and it could go back 4 quarters. So it's whatever's over $100 delinquent as of October 1st.
And so these actually end up on our tax bills, town and county tax bills, a separate line that reads water rents.
I will say that when I was paying mine years ago, that whoever I spoke with told me to just let it go on your tax bill. So I mean that was what I was affirmatively told. So the message may be not a good message. Let it go on my tax
Well,
bill.
and one thing I'll point out to the board that the town, You're right, that right now there's no penalty for allowing that to happen. So you pay the interest or you pay the penalties, but if you were late, you were going to pay them anyways. There are municipalities that have a fee to do that. So if you allow it to roll over to lien, you can assign any fee that you want, $50, $75, $100. You can be as punitive as you like in an effort to try to get people to pay. So that's the board's option. We have never done that before, but you
Is
do have.
that something you recommend?
You know, I not necessarily. I mean, the town doesn't have a cash flow problem. If we were hurting for cash, it might be a way to stimulate payments to come in. You know, you see the amount is pretty steady every year. It's in the area of $100,000. So it's not the end of the world. And again, we're made whole every year. So.
Okay.
Okay. Authorization to obtain bids for refuse and recycling for town-owned buildings. This is actually a shared service with the Chappaqua Central School District. They actually take the lead on it, go out to bid, and we piggyback with them. Rec and Parks is going to a conference. Authorization to obtain bids to replace the stairs behind Gedney Park, field number 2. Those steps have been cordoned off for, I want to say the better part of a year. So we're hoping to get that project done. We are going to relocate our TOTS camp in one of the elementary schools this year, back from the First Congregational Church. The church was wonderful and very accommodating to us while the school was unable to do that, but we're going to try to go back into the school this year and see how it works. We need authorization to purchase 2 valves for the Millwood water treatment plant. There's an authorization to purchase repairs for a DPW Mack truck dump and plow truck, and authorization to release a cash bond agreement for Kerry Lane. Does the board have any questions on those?
Nope.
Otherwise, we do have 3 resolutions before you.
Does anyone have those up?
Yep. Payment of claims, checks dated March 16, 2022. I move to approve the payment of claims in the amount of $574,214.66, listed on the summary pre-check writing report and detailed voucher detail reports, all dated March 11, 2022. Checks will be issued and mailed to each claimant listed on Wednesday, March 16, 2022.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Authorization to approve Newcastle water rents as tax liens. I move to adopt the following resolution. Be it resolved that, 1, the attached schedule of charges for unpaid water for properties shown on the tax rolls are hereby fixed and determined by the board and certified to the supervisor of the town of Newcastle. 2, that such amounts are levied against the real property as set forth on the attached schedule of charges for unpaid water. 3, that the same be raised by tax upon the real property in the town of Newcastle, liable therefore at that time and in the manner provided by the town law and Westchester County Administrative Code. And 4, that the amount of such tax be stated in a separate column in the annual tax rolls of the town of Newcastle under a column entitled Water Rents.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I'll take the next one.
Resolution scheduling a public hearing and making referrals on a proposed local law enacting a moratorium for the North Greeley corridor. I move to adopt the following resolution. Whereas on March 15th, 2022, the town board introduced a proposed local law enacting a temporary moratorium on the review of new land use applications for the site plan approval, special permit approval, variance relief, building permits, and sign permits pertaining to properties located in the North Greeley corridor, as identified on the map annexed to the proposed law. And whereas the town board believes that a moratorium is necessary to preserve the status quo while it crafts new zoning legislation for the North Greeley corridor, and whereas maintaining the status quo will protect the public interest and welfare, ensure consistency with new zoning requirements, promote community planning values by regulating land development based on a carefully considered plan, and prevent potential applicants from seeking approvals before new conditions and requirements are established. And whereas the adoption of this moratorium is a Type 2 action pursuant to the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act, and accordingly, no further environmental review is required. Now therefore be it resolved that the town board hereby refers to the annexed proposed law to the town of Newcastle Planning Board and the Westchester County Planning Department for comments thereon. Further resolved that the town board schedules a public hearing on the proposed local law for April 26, 2022. Yeah, that's right. April 5th, 2022 at 7:00 p.m. or as soon thereafter as the matter is called on the agenda in the Assembly Room of the Newcastle Town Hall, 200 South Greeley Avenue, Chappaqua, New York, 10514.
You wouldn't feel more comfortable having the public hearings in this room? Because that's why the 26th is there, because we don't have this room for the 5th or the 19th.
Let's start it on the 5th, and we're gonna end up postponing, adjourning it anyway. It's just that one public hearing, right?
I understand, but both of those meetings are going to be in the conference room. So the idea of having more than us, 10 people in a little room.
As I sit here watching Jill with the mask.
I'm the only one with a mask on, so obviously I'm sensitive
The
about it.
safety consideration is what you're saying,
I mean,
yes.
there was a whole discussion about COVID because of building things. COVID's still here, so.
Okay,
Your
if
decision.
you feel much more comfortable, I'm okay postponing.
I agree.
You want to reread that
So
last?
just amend it as of the 26th?
And then if I disagree with some of the content, but in principle, I agree with sending it for review. I can still support, just to make a clarity and say I don't necessarily support the whereases, but I support the final conclusion.
We're just setting a public
I
hearing.
get it, but I just, for clarity.
If you're in favor of setting the public hearing and going forward and having the public discussion, then I think that's a yes. If you have reservations, I think that's, you've stated them, but.
Well, this is on the public hearing, not
Correct.
on the substance.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, so we still need a second, so I second.
We need
Well,
all in
As
favor.
with the 26th.
Yes,
As
with the
amended.
amending of
Yes.
the 26th.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
All right, can I entertain a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you, everybody.
Everyone?
Jill, did you say that?